Welcome to the F4 podcast, where your hosts, Brian, Brooke, Charles, and Vanessa, discuss all things faith, family, friends, and fitness. What is F4? Sometimes it's a glimpse into how we navigate the world, and sometimes it's a deep dive into how we handle the four main areas of our lives. If you want to have a healthier relationship with God, family, friends, and yourself, this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this episode.
Hey, welcome to episode 11 of the F4 podcast. This is exciting because we're entering a new time. Guest. If we haven't met, I'm Charles Giddens. I'm one of your F4 hosts, and I want to thank you for listening and watching our podcast. If you could follow us on Instagram and like and share the podcast, we would greatly appreciate it. We're on multiple platforms, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Pocket, Breaker, Anchor, and YouTube now. If you would like to be a sponsor of the show, you can send us a message on Instagram, Facebook, or via email at f4ncpodcast@gmail.com. I'm joined today by the F4 crew, my wife Vanessa.
Hi.
And our best friends Brian and Brooke Marston.
Hello.
And today we have a very special guest, Matt Marston.
Howdy.
Yay!
So today's our first podcast that we have a guest with us. It's taken us a year, but I thought it would be helpful for us to be able to have a subject matter expert on the topic that we're going to cover today. Before we get to that, I want to say today is going to be an episode that is specifically aimed at all of us that are Christians, and specifically Christians with kids, or any of us that are involved with kids in any way. With that being said, I think it's going to be there are going to be a lot of areas that are going to cross over and are going to be helpful for you regardless. So stick with us. I think you might pick up some stuff in this podcast that help you out. So that brings me to our special guest today, Matt Marston. Matt's one of 4 kids that Brian and Brooke have. He is 19 and about to finish up his associates in college and move on to the rest of his college career very shortly. And I thought it'd be neat to get his perspective on all this, because not only is Matt a typical young college student, but he is also a pastor's kid. He's a PK. So we thought that would be pretty cool. And there are a lot of good things that happen in that kind of relationship. And the internet is full of horror stories of PKs as well. So Matt has not only survived that transition to college, but his faith and a servant's heart, that is something that we'd want for all of our kids, and he's doing a great job. So this didn't happen on its own, though. So I think Matt kind of got some of that with other people at the other end of the table. So I just want to dive right in. So according to the Fuller Youth Institute, over half of all high school seniors walk away from their faith in college. And that's a pretty staggering and scary number. And as a parent and a Christian and someone who's in ministry at this point, this is one of the biggest problems that I see that our kids and our society as a whole have right now. And there are there's a lot of ministry at this table. There's a lot of all the way from preschool and infant ministry all the way up through student ministry, and everyone from being on staff or a volunteer, everyone is represented at this table in this area, and we all have kids. Some of us not as many as the others, but we all have kids, which is pretty important. So I want to dive right into the massively loaded question that's going to kind of guide us through our topic today. So how do you pass your faith down to your kids, and what are your kids looking for from you as parents, but as well as what are they looking for from the church when it comes to growing their faith? So pretty big, loaded, huge topic, and we're just going to dive right in. So what happens to people, guys, when they get older, college age, away from mom and dad, or still with mom and dad, and what do you think happens, and why does it happen?
So I think a couple things. The first thing that pops into my head is I think when people get to college age, there really is kind of this, and I think it comes from society, but I think it also is very natural and positive. It should happen. I think that people think, okay, now I'm out on my own. I need to test my wings. I need to figure out who I am, what I think. I'm out from underneath maybe the authority of my parents, or I'm out from underneath the influence of my parents. You might think you're out from underneath the influence of your parents. I'm going to spread my wings. I'm going to fly. I'm going to explore what's out there maybe I haven't experienced before. So I think that is part of it. But I do also think that if a person hasn't been involved in serving in any kind of way, I think they don't feel an ownership. And so you get outside of, your home church. People talk about their home church. You get outside of that. You get outside of what's normal. If you haven't had an experience where you have been a contributing member of anything that's happening, I think that you don't know what your place is. And so I think it's really hard to find your place and establish that when you haven't ever experienced what that looks like before. Now, I'm, older, so it's not as fresh for me, but I think that's one of the things I have witnessed happen.
So we'll get to the young buck at the table in just a second. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Brooke. It's one of those things where if you don't have ownership, it's not going to translate beyond your family and where you grew up, because you're living off their faith. And the other thing that's interesting is if church is just something you go to as opposed to who you are as the body of Christ, seeking to fulfill the Great Commission, that you're going and making disciples, and it's just something that you just show up to, I think there's a disconnect. So then when students get to college and they no longer have mom and dad there to say, we're going to church, and they haven't been to church, they've just gone to church, and they go to college, and it's like, well, that's irrelevant in my life. And then they meet friends, and they don't have the friends and community that are pushing them that way, because that's hard to find when you go away to college. Then it's easy for them to not even see that as important for them to continue with, because it's just something they went to, not something that they actually were. And so I thought about the verse, of course, from Proverbs 13:20, which we've referred to before, that he who walks with the wise is wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. So there's that one sense of you don't have those people around you who are like your faith community anymore, if you did. And then also 1 Corinthians 12:27, where Paul writes, now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And if you never find your place in the body, again, because you're just going to church and not being the church, then I think it's a recipe for leaving the church.
Yeah, I think 100%. What do you think?
I was one of those people that pretty much abandoned my faith pretty wholeheartedly in college. And a lot of it for me, I think, was I had some very strong examples of Christian life and Christian love in my grandmother and my aunt, and but not so much my parents.
Yeah.
And so when I went away to school, and I had kind of bounced back and forth, and I was exploring different denominations and all kinds of things in high school, and was really kind of trying to find my own way. And I went to Furman University to start with, and I started at Furman the year after they pulled out of the Southern Baptist Convention. So they had been a traditionally Southern Baptist school, and I went and was experiencing my time of transition and change, I think at the same time that Furman was.
Yeah.
So I didn't experience anybody really reaching out to me or trying to bring me in or take me under their wing. Or I think a lot of, even I was a resident assistant my sophomore year. And I think even then, it was when I interviewed for the job, it was like, well, what would you do if somebody was Hindu and living on your hall, you know? And I think the school was trying to figure it out as much as I was. So I got pretty lost and swept up into all of the change and PC, and so that's what I think.
So, Matt, I'm curious, since you are going through this now and you have a lot of friends, obviously at the same age you are and going through a lot of the same things, what specifically are you seeing with your friends? What have you seen that's happened? What do you think happens when you get out of the house?
Well, I think there's like that freedom. Like you think it's your choice now to go to church, and like you're not having your parents like drag you on Sunday morning like, hey, get up, it's time to go. Because when you're at college, you're by yourself, or like that it's your decision at that point. And I think a lot of churches don't really have environments for college students in that sense, because you've gone through your whole life. Like if you're like me and have been in the church whole life, you know, you have each ministry. You have like pre-K, and then you have kindergarten through 5th, and then you have middle school, high school. Then after that, it's like, okay, you're running with the 40, 50-year-olds now, and you're like, I'm 18 years old. My life is completely different from someone who's 30, 40, 50. So then like messages or topics in a church may not resonate as much with me, and I'll be like, do I really fit here? Is this where I fit? And that's I see a lot of that happen.
Okay. We'll get back. I wrote it down. We'll get back to that. I think
I find that extremely challenging, and not in a bad way, in a very good way.
I think it highlights a lot of probably what we're going to figure out as we're going through this. But yeah. I think for me, when I left home, growing up the way I did, in an environment that I did with probably a little bit stricter guidelines. I was always involved in sports. I was working. There was always things to do that was very structured for me. And when I got to college, I had a job. But there was not a lot of structure. And I think my faith community that I had, although very good, was very tied to a couple of people in general, and I left them. And when I left them, I felt kind of lost. And I think partly because of what we talk about all the time, but my faith was not mature at that point, you know, and I'm still consistently, you know, working on that now, but it was not matured at that point. So when I got off and got away from the influence of my friends, one or two specific friends, and got away from the structure of jobs and my parents and having to do things and having to be in sports and having to, you know, make sure my life was pretty regimented, you know, everything kind of felt like, to Matt's point, there was a lot of freedom there.
Oh, yeah.
Probably more than should have been there, looking back on it right now. You know, and obviously a lot of that shaped who I am today, which is great. But I do think for me it was, to Matt's point, there was just too much freedom. And again, you got to learn that at some point. You have to learn how to manage that. Man, I'm just not sure 18 is the world's best time to manage that. I mean, that's just kind of how everything's set up these days. I get it. But I do think the society or the kids that are, you know, and look at the rest of your kids and Parker, things are a little different, and it's a little bit scary at 18 to go, oh, now you really get to navigate that, because things are very different from a society standpoint of how much freedom we give kids up to the point that they're 18, that they leave from us. Like, it's almost you have no freedom, and now you have all the freedom in the world just from the way society is set up in 2020 or 2021 versus, you know, 1990. You know, and even
1993
for you. Some of us are a little bit older and younger, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a little different now. So I'm curious, Matt, and maybe you'll have the great answer for me. But so why? Because I've seen you, I've been around you for a while now. I guess almost half your life, somewhere in that neighborhood, close. I haven't seen that be something that you've shied away from. In fact, I've seen more involvement, I think, now at 19 than I did when you were younger. And I wasn't around you as much in that environment when you were younger, but like you seem to be digging in now and almost becoming more mature in your faith. So why is that? Why has none of that happened to you?
Well, with me, I think volunteering. I got in volunteering like right out of the gate, right out as I got done with 5th grade, and like that's kind of when they start saying, "Hey, you can volunteer. You're in middle school now." I started volunteering like immediately, and I think that was extremely helpful because then I started to find things. Oh, like this is kind of fun. Like I like doing this, like running tech stuff for the kids ministry. Like I had a lot of fun doing that. Leading a small group, I had fun doing that, and I'm like, oh, this is fun. Like it became not like, oh, I gotta go to church because I want to go see the message. It's I get to go because I want to run lights, I want to run sound, I want to run slides, I want to see my group, stuff like that. It wasn't like, oh, I just got to go because I got to watch the pastor give a message, sing a few songs, and then go home and let that be that. And then as I got older, I got more involved with playing music in the church, and I think I have a lot of good friends from that, and that's just kind of helped me like dig in more because those friends have helped me stay kind of stuck.
Brian, what do you think about
that? It's something that I think reiterates the value of being the church. And Matt, when I hear Matt talk, I hear Matt seeing that he has a place. He's not just the future, he's the now. And so I see him recognizing his value. And the thing about it that I'm probably grateful for looking back on our leadership experience is getting to lead a church in a portable location that was new. And I'm grateful for that because that's when I really saw Matt and even some of my other kids see their value and go, I'm not just showing up and checking a box. This is not just a 1 hour a week kind of thing. This is a lifestyle. And if I don't, it won't happen. And so for me, I'm grateful looking back on that because I see how formative that's been for Matt, much more than even just a message or a series of messages. While those are important, they're not what he's mentioning in this moment. And it's because of ownership. The showing up for a message, anybody can do, and it's passive. But when you are actually serving, it's active. You're engaged. So that's what I hear him saying, and I'm proud of him.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the portable environment because that is so not a lot of people sign up to be part of that because it's not easy.
Yeah, you can't just check a box, right?
You can't just
I showed up for church today. I brought my Bible. Oh, I even brought a friend.
It's actually like I came 3 hours early and I did all of this terrible stuff that nobody wants to do.
And I'm tired.
Yeah.
And stayed 3 hours late to undo it all.
Right, exactly. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, and it's great because 14 and 15-year-olds, for all of the bad reputation that they get, when people talk about, oh, those teenagers, kids these days, whatever, about 14 and 15-year-olds, they'll do that kind of stuff with, way less complaining and a lot more consistency than a lot of adults. And so, I don't know, I just think it's really interesting that you mentioned that because I do think that was a huge part of Matt, and like you said, even some of our other kids going, man, if I don't show up, there isn't going to be anybody here who's willing to do this.
If I don't, it won't.
Right.
There's nothing that builds ownership more than looking around and seeing, I better do this because nobody else is here.
I mean, so two of your kids have one Micah is now volunteered for me. Another is volunteering currently. He's on the other side of the room, and she's doing a great job. One was actually an intern for me. So I've seen all of your kids do the same kind of stuff, which is pretty exciting. And I will go back to say, and Parker has now volunteered in ways for the church in a lot of different ways, which I think is fantastic. But it should make both of you feel good that your kids are that involved and they're doing things that they don't have to. I mean, you don't force your kids to volunteer. Right? Nope. As long as I've known you two, you've never forced them to do anything. And they just do it, and they do it with a servant's heart, which is fantastic. So much so that we're having meetings and going, hey, I don't like this. I need this to be fixed for one of your kids, because I'm a little concerned here that I want this to be different. So I think it's fantastic, and it should make both of you feel really good. Kind of not jumping tracks, but getting into that. So Matt, you play. You mentioned you're playing in multiple worship situations.
When you say play, you mean play guitar?
Play guitar, yes. Yeah, so sorry, yeah, play guitar. I need to be very clear there. And I'm curious because at some point, someone, and I don't know the entire story. I know some of the story, but at some point, someone said, "Hey, I'm giving this young kid an opportunity to jump in and do things like this." So walk me through kind of what that felt like when you were going through that, and how has that led to your faith being different right now?
Well, I think with like that whole experience, it helped me kind of like really be able to, like I said earlier, dive in even more, because I love playing my guitar. I love doing it. I love doing it in and like out of church. So even when it's not Sunday or Wednesday, I'm still having active, probably like worship throughout the week, because I'm practicing because I want to play it right. But I'm also still kind of reflecting on like the songs and like what they say, what they mean. And I think music is one of the best forms of art. I think that the way it can express emotions through words and tones, like just it all like then like comes together. It's like a very it's a great form of art, like just to keep it simple. But yeah, and I think with me just being able to go all in with that, someone initially told me like a few years back, when I was first doing like kind of like the stuff to kind of get into the process of playing, they were like, "Yeah, I didn't think you were gonna be able to play." They're like, "I didn't think you were really that good," but they're like, "You proved me wrong," and I appreciated that, and I appreciated that like they still gave me the chance, they still gave me the opportunity to do that, and I think it's helped grow my faith and helped me be able to stay connected maybe in the church more than I would have if I would have not been able to play.
I think that's a great answer. I think for us being adults, and I say for us being adults, and really for us being adults in a church environment, I think it's very important for us to remember that, hey, kids, to your point, Brooke, kids will do whatever, if given the opportunity. And I think in a lot of environments, in a lot of churches that we've grown up in, I don't think that was never really a thing. Like, you're not old enough to serve. You're not old enough to make a difference. You're not old enough to do any of this stuff. And I think it speaks volumes to an environment where Matt was given the opportunity, or your other kids are given the opportunity to say, hey, we think this is important, and this is a way for you to help not only your faith, but it's a way to help other people's faith.
Yep.
And I think it's something that we need to, and I say we, and if you're watching this and you're any way involved in any sort of church organization at all, I think this is something you got to make sure that's always on the front of mind, because if we don't, and I say we collectively, if we don't hit this that early, we could lose people, and then Matt's in a different situation.
There's a window of opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for all kinds of people. I think that we all walk into situations, maybe some of us more than others, and we look for ourselves in the environment. We look for people that reflect who we think we are or who we want to be. And we look around and we say, okay, is there anybody here who's like me? And if, a 15-year-old walks into an environment and all they see are 65-year-olds, it's really hard for them to see themselves as being part of that environment because it's just too big of a bridge, to get a gap to bridge. I was saying it backwards, but too big of a gap to bridge. But I think opportunities where people who are younger can volunteer, then, if you have a middle schooler volunteering, then you have second and third graders that are seeing themselves as part of the church because they are more able to see themselves as a middle schooler than they are as even a high schooler or, their parents' age. So, and I think that that's true from a, skin color and diversity standpoint from that arena as well. But I think age is as much an issue, for seeing yourself as, they let middle schoolers volunteer. They let high schoolers volunteer. They are part of the church. I can be part of the church too.
Well, and I think it's interesting you say that because even the retired generation oftentimes see themselves as irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And so it's every age on some level can feel like maybe they don't have a place depending on maybe what they're going through. And so it's contingent upon us to recognize every age group as being valuable and being able to offer value and being part of the body of Christ, which is one of the reasons I want our church to reflect a multi-generational church. Because there are plenty of people in my life who are further down the road that say things sometimes that I'm like, okay, I need to tune into what they're saying because they have experience I don't have. Mm-hmm. As much as I want to have it or think I know it all, I don't. And so to be able to have them in my life is valuable. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are people in that generation that say things and I go, I don't have that perspective either.
Right.
Because while I was 19 at one point in time, I'm not anymore.
The world is different now.
And I haven't been in a few years. So it's important for me to listen to both ends and then in the middle because they all bring value.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important. And I think a couple of the things that we listen to and we watch and we study as a group from a family ministry standpoint is, I was at your point once 19, but my world at 19 is not the same world that Matt is living at 19 or any other 19-year-old. So I can say, well, I've been there. I've lived in your shoes. Mm-hmm. That's not accurate. It's just not you were 19, sure, but you were 19 in an age with cell phones because guess what? I didn't have cell phones at 19. They didn't exist. I didn't have, access to 4K streaming video games at 19 the way that generation does. I didn't have access to the information that's streaming all the time that generation does. So I can say, well, I was your age once, and let me tell you how it is, kid. That just isn't. It's not an accurate statement any longer. And I think the more we pull ourselves out of that, the better. To your point, when we start listening and understand that Matt's 19 is not my 19, so I need to listen to what he has to say.
I had a beeper.
I was just thinking we were going to the computer lab to check our email on the university campus.
Email.
I knew one guy with a cell phone in high school, and it was his dad's car phone.
Bag phone. Big, huge, ugly car phone. Yeah.
Yeah, I still had a cord on it, but it was in the car.
Right. I mean, so look, I can remember I was in whatever math I was in my freshman year at University of Georgia, and we were the first class to actually take tests on a computer. Our test, everything else wasn't, but our tests were actually administered on a computer. And it was like the first class at UGA to do that. And this was in 1992. I mean,
groundbreaking.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, so I don't know the world that my 13-year-old son is in. I don't know the world that he's in. I mean, and as much as I think that I got a pretty good grasp, because I remember what it's like at 19, but it's not the same. It's not.
Not the same.
No, but speaking of that, so I want to switch gears a little bit. And how can the church help kids? So from elementary age all the way up to high school, and even to Matt's point, college, which I think there's some things we can get into in just a minute with that. But how do we help, or how does the church help them have a greater faith and love for Jesus? Like, what do you guys think?
Well, I think with like small groups and stuff, I think it goes all the way to that. I think when kind of like what you were saying with seeing someone your age, so like there's a middle school leader for an elementary school small group, I think that's crucial because I think also, like what you were saying too, you get two different perspectives. If you have an adult leader and then a student leader, you get both perspectives, because then you have the life experience from the adult leader, but then you can have the student leader that's able to like empathize or be able to say, you know what, I was there 3 years ago, I was there 4 years ago, like not, oh yeah, like 15 years ago back in World War II, you know, like back in Nam, but like no, that you're able to say like, yeah, I was there not that long ago, and they can think back, oh yeah, 4 years ago wasn't that long ago. I can remember 4 years ago, but I think that's something that's huge, because like that was a huge part for me, because especially in middle school, my favorite small group leader was the college age student, because they made the most difference. But then as I got older, I grew a fantastic relationship with the adult leader, and I ended up having 2 adult leaders by the end. And I had a great relationship with both of them, and I loved both of them. But if there wasn't that student leader early on, I probably would have been like, I don't care. Like, what do you know? Like,
I have a dad. I don't need another dad.
I know. Like, why do I need another old man telling me what to do? Like,
What do you think, Vanessa?
I think a lot of what Matt says is very valid. I think that I was pretty plugged into a youth group when I was in high school, but I didn't have student leaders. There was the youth minister, who was a young guy, and he was pretty cool, but he wasn't. I mean, you see what I mean? He wasn't the guy that would show up. He didn't come to any of my plays. He didn't. I mean, and there were, I don't know, 40 of us in that youth group. We never experienced small groups. So I never had somebody outside of my family that I could count on to show up. And when I look at it now from a parent's perspective, you know, we fail as parents regularly, and we fall down. And it's nice we have, as parents, the support system, including the 3 of you, to help pick up the pieces when when we do fail. And I never had that. So I think having a church system that shows young people that others will show up for them because they are valued, I think is great.
It's good.
Family ministry director.
I think both of you guys touched on that small group scenario, and I think that's huge, because from a large group standpoint, there's only so much you can do. You know, there's only so much a youth pastor can do when they have even, 30 kids. You talk about 40 kids, and some churches, have youth groups with, hundreds of students. There's only so much a youth pastor, even a really awesome, cool young youth pastor, there's only so much he or she can do in that kind of situation to be all of those places. And I think small group is and having small group leaders is so huge. Having a person who's there, even if they're not cool, like, it doesn't even matter. Just having a person who's there, who shows up for those things, who checks in, who says, hey, how's it going? Even if a kid doesn't seem to care about it, I think ultimately knowing that somebody's there is maybe even the more important piece of ever having to reach out to that adult or college student or whatever. Just knowing that somebody's there, I think, is a big piece of it.
Yeah, and if it's somebody in a church, then when you're off on your own, where do you go? You go to the church. You don't search for it in random people. You know where it came from, even though it might have been a random person initially, but the relationship developed at church. So where do you go? You go to church, because that's the experience that you've had.
Right. I do think that small group is just such a huge And I think as small group leaders, it can sometimes be frustrating when you have middle schoolers or high schoolers in particular, because it feels like, oh, well, we never get to the questions that we're supposed to be talking about, or we never get to the, we're not talking about anything that seems like any value. But I think just being together on a consistent basis, again, is the more important part of it, not some deep conversation that you're having that's all of a sudden life-changing. I think it's the fact that you show up and you're there and you try to talk about something that's meaningful, but even if it doesn't feel meaningful to you, the fact that you're there makes it meaningful for the group, or even a student or two in particular. That's what I got.
So I think Brian probably has some things to add on this. So you've been taking it in. What do you think? How can the church help?
I think they covered it well.
Okay.
Yep. I know we've got other things to discuss. And
Yeah.
I think we'll get to what we need to get to.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of that, I think the next piece that actually is fascinating to me, and we've heard it in multiple places, but Fuller actually talks about this very well, the Fuller Youth Institute. Is the church answering questions that kids are not even asking, right? So that aren't relevant. Because I think if we really take a step back, and to your point, like having these deep philosophical conversations, it's not really how you're going to win a 14 or 15-year-old kid over. I just don't see them, and I think there are times that it's appropriate, and you're going to, you're probably going to have that, but it's not going to be something that you're going to lead with. It's not going to be something that really you are going to do. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, the church is known for what we're against, not what we're for, and like all of that kind of plays into answering questions for not just Matt's generation, but Parker's generation, or anybody's generation, that they're not asking, that they don't care about. That's not important to them, because at the end of the day, I think we can craft the best curriculum, we can follow the best curriculum in the world, and if that's not helping a parent, right, win with their kid, it doesn't matter that we taught them about Paul today. It's irrelevant if that mom is not able to get their kid out of bed in the morning and without a fight. You know what I mean? So with that being said, like, what kind of questions, I'm curious, and we'll go to Matt first, and I think all of us probably have an answer here, but what kind of questions do you want answered, Matt, that the church isn't answering, or do you get frustrated with sermons and things that are you're being taught or preached to, or in general, life lessons that you don't even care about at the point that at 19?
That's a really long question. I was like thinking of an answer, and then I was like,
yeah.
But I think that with at least me, for my age, that you'd want the church to say or hear is that, like, acknowledge your age group as like an age group, because like in my experience, especially going through high school, it was like your middle-aged family, like nuclear family, like husband, wife, 2 kids. Just that's who we're preaching to. That's who we're going to talk to. Just because that's our majority of our demographic. That's who we're going to just talk to. But then, like, if you're sitting on the outside of that, you're like, well, what about me? They may touch on it and be like, well, for college students, this, that, this, and that, and maybe takes about 30 seconds, and then they go back to the whole message, and it's like, all right, so there are my 2 notes from today's message that I can apply to my everyday life, and just take that into this next week. And then it's like, then you're left like asking questions like, well, what else can I do, or like stuff like that.
I think that's, and I've heard it now from the very beginning. I wrote it down, right? I think one of the couple of things that you said, I think having an environment for your age group is probably a little bit important. and probably, and I don't know exactly how to do it the right way, right? I think
it's not easy.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are people out there that have figured it out, and they're very smart, and but I think that's important to remember. And I think and I don't speak on the adult service stage like Brian, like your dad does. So those are all things that he has to frame up when he's creating messages and writing and doing. So I guess I'll default to you, Brian. What do you? Not even touching on a question that you think the church is answering that the kids aren't asking. I say kids, young adults aren't asking. What do you think about what Matt's saying about an environment for that age group?
Yeah, I think it's challenging because unless you're just like smack dab like on a college campus, most of your demographic is probably not going to reflect that, and they're extremely transient. So it's maybe difficult to establish relationship, and then it's hard to find people who are willing to do that, I guess, who see that as their calling, to almost have this missional mindset of, I feel called to a group of people that are going to leave and could all and may not really buy into anything we do. And I think it's already hard enough for like high school leaders, because now and the way it is now, the high school is almost like the college used to be, because their parents are giving them a lot more freedom. And they get a license, and that's almost like if there's not a relationship in place by the time they're 16, the likelihood that they're going to stay with church drops dramatically. And it's just been from my observation.
Yeah.
So I would say a parent, if they don't partner with the church when their kids are in elementary school and in middle school, they're totally missing the mark. And when I say partner, I'm not just talking about checking the box and saying, I attended. Hey, I've engaged, and I'm modeling this for my kid, not because I just wanted to model it for my kid, but because this is who I am. I am part of the body of Christ. And I think for me, it's really important to not refer to the church as a geographical location, but as a living, active body. And that distinction to me is critically important, because I think it's here where we see the drop-off. When it comes to our current reality, I find it challenging because I don't think like a college student. And so what I'm even in this moment thinking about is I probably need to have more conversations with those who are in college and in different life stations to say, hey, how does this particular subject matter interact with you right now, to be able to get a broader perspective? Because as much as I think I know a lot, which I think we all think we know a lot, I know what I know. And if I'm not incorporating those views, I cannot assume. I do think God's truth does transcend some of our weakness, because his truth is the truth. It's not based on me. But if I can get better at presenting it in a compelling way, then I definitely want to do it. So I find this extremely challenging in a good way. And I'm thankful that that you took the initiative to invite Matt to this, because it's making me think how I can be better at what I do, because I don't want a generation to think that I don't care about them. It bothers me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in this whole conversation, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I feel like maybe we've talked about this before, or maybe it's been a question of the day at the gym, I don't know, but like, when did you feel like you were an adult? I think is part of, the question that we have to ask ourselves, because in reflection, like, I'm not sure that I felt like an adult when I was 18. Like, part of me did, because I wasn't in high school anymore, and you start to experience that freedom, and you're like, yes, I'm an adult. And then you like have to pay for things yourself, and then you go, okay, well now I feel like an adult. Or oh, well, now I have kids and somebody else is dependent on me. So then I feel like an adult. And I just think it's hard to, look back and think, okay, when did I really start feeling like an adult? And we throw 18 and 19-year-olds into an environment with adults. But if we're completely honest, there's a bunch of people in the room that are just faking it because they know they should feel like an adult by now, but they really don't feel like an adult any more than the 18 or 19-year-old that's in the room. But everybody's talking to them like they are an adult, so they're like, oh, yeah, I got this. Yeah, I go to work every day. I'm responsible. And I don't know. I think probably if we talked to 18 and 19-year-olds as the major demographic, we probably would cover a larger percentage of the people than we think we would cover, because there's just a lot of people in the room faking it like they have it all together.
Yeah.
And we're all still just trying to figure it out.
It's like fixing something in a house that maybe you haven't fixed before, and you're like, I should know how to do this. And you go to YouTube and...
I'm a grown man.
That's right, I'm 40. I'm a man. That's for our Oklahoma State fans.
Yeah. I mean, there are days I'm 47. I'm like, I still don't feel like an adult. I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you think?
I honestly have no idea.
So, Matt, let me ask you this, because I feel like this was sort of part of the question, but we went kind of a different direction. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if the church is talking about parenting, you're not really seeing yourself in that, because you're like, I'm not married, I don't have kids, I will now tune out because this does not apply to me. What is it that either your dad or any other speaker that you're listening to, what is it that they will say that like really gets your attention? What are topics or issues that you think, yes, tell me more about
Sex.
that?
Yeah, I know. I was about to say, I was like, if they just shout sex, that gets everyone's attention immediately. It will get deathly quiet. Like,
I think that's probably true from, I think that goes across the spectrum.
The whole room like sits up straight, and then they're like, what's he going to say next? Like, yeah, but I think, yeah, because like what you said, like with talking about parenting, and then me being 19, single, not married, no kids, just like, what does this have to do with me? This has nothing to do with me. Like, I'm just gonna tune out now. I'm gonna like start drawing on one of the things on like the back of the chairs, or like just get through this service and then go on with my week, and then maybe next week I'll hear something I like. But I think that's just like kind of like what you were saying. Like, it's difficult because there's a lot to talk to, and it's like if you don't talk about parenting at all, then you have your parents in the room like, now what do I do? And that's the tricky part.
So like they're thinking, how do I get my kid to comply? Like in the morning, you made reference to that earlier, Charles, to get out of bed and get ready for school. That's something you bring up. Parents have been dealing with those kind of issues forever.
Yeah.
So being able to speak into that's important, yet at the same time, it's thinking, okay, in the room are people who will never be a parent or are not there right now. How do we help make sure that it doesn't go so far down this tunnel that they're completely like, I don't see myself in this at all? So I think it really is an art form, and it's something that's really challenging.
So, Matt, let me ask you, digging a little deeper, take it outside of the walls of church on Sunday.
We're not walls.
But that's my
We are
point.
the
That's what I'm
church.
getting at. Is there anything that you think that the church, the body of Christ church, should be doing or asking or talking about that we're not, that's important to you as someone who is not married, is a young man who's still not entirely sure how you're going to be going about the rest of your life, but is there something that the broader church should be talking about or stop talking about?
That's a good question.
I think the dog said amen in the background.
I really think that I can't really think of anything like in particular like this is what they need to talk about. This is what I need to hear. But I think it's the feeling of needing to be almost seen. I think we've kind of touched on that, and because it's like what I said earlier, it's like, oh, you're out of high school, got to time to go play with the adults, like enough like running around with the high schoolers, and then like middle school, like all that. It's like, okay, you got to join the big leagues, and I think like initially that's a lot, and that's a lot to handle, and especially if you're going from high school to college and you're leaving your house, you're leaving your home church, and you're joining a new church, and there's not really a ministry there that like is for you. Like that is where you feel like they're talking to you, and then you're already going in, you're feeling lost already. You're like, okay, do I fit in? Is this for me? And you go in and you're like, this 60-year-old man's talking about his 1980 Mustang, and I'm like, what in the world? And like everyone in the room is saying amen, and I'm like, what is he talking about? and I think it's like what you said, like what is the church as a whole? I think it's just seeing that college age as its own, because like what I said, you have ministries for all the others, and then that one also kind of what we said is you're still trying to figure everything out. Mm-hmm. And we don't really grow out of figuring everything out because we never really figure everything out, but I think that one is where you're just kind of like wide-eyed, like, what am I doing?
I think another demographic that the church forgets about a lot is single adults in general. And I think the college
Amen.
The college age, I think, is like double whammy, because not only are most people in that demographic still single, but they're also young without some of the life experience and some of the even situations. You know, if you talk about, hey, this is how to deal with this topic in your workplace, if you're predominantly a student, workplace advice or workplace practicality isn't maybe the most. You may have a part-time job, but that's not where you're spending the majority of your time. You're spending the majority of your time in a classroom or on a campus or with a roommate or with peers. But I think single adults kind of face that same thing. If you're always talking about marriage or you're always talking about parenting or whatever, then you have a group of people who are like, that's great for you, but here I am over here, and I don't. And I think for a college student, it's, like I said, kind of a double whammy.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Matt, you grew up in a large family. There's a lot of you. You know, very committed to God and church in so many ways. So I think you look at that, and there are two outcomes that happen. I don't think there's anything in between. It's either you run completely away from that when you get older, right? Or you stick with it in a really big way. I don't really see there being a lot of ambiguity there in between. And I could be wrong. I just past experience from people I knew growing up that, you know, were like that from me, from everybody that I know. It's either you're all in or you're completely all out as you get older. And that's a completely generalization I get. But I'm curious, why do you think, and I really want to know, why do you think you've landed the way you have and haven't walked away when now you could?
Well, if we're being completely honest, I have thought about walking away. Like I have. I've thought, is this for me? And I think that comes with getting older, because you get a little smarter. You start thinking more. You start like thinking, is this for me? Is this? You start diving into like maybe the religion more. Like, what is this? Like asking the deeper questions. And And I did that, and I started like diving into more of like the stuff beyond like a Sunday sermon, and I've found, you know what, sticking with this is probably my best option, because I've seen what happens when people turn away. I've seen what happens because I have friends. I have people who used to be in my small group and now like weren't. And then I've seen what happens if they run away, and I've seen what happens if they stay. So I've seen both outcomes. And I think that's probably what made me kind of stay the course. And it also goes back to volunteering, is I was already connected. I felt like I belonged. I felt like I was needed. I felt like I was wanted. Because I don't want to leave anyone like hanging, like high and dry. Like if the church needed a sound person and I like just upped and left out of word, they didn't have anyone, and it was just, like I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that at all. So I think all those things kind of influenced that decision to just kind of stay with it.
I think it's interesting hearing that, right? And, you know, I think all of us at some point in our life have felt exactly what you just expressed. I think it's amazing at 19 that you expressed it and have already figured that out. I think it probably took me a little bit longer than 19 to figure that one out. But I think what you said, I think a lot of us have gone through or go through. And I think a lot of people watching this or hearing this probably are thinking the same thing. And especially if they're younger, they're definitely thinking that. So I think it's fantastic that you've already figured that out. As your dad's over there riding like a madman.
He's like, I love this son very much. I'm going to get him a great Christmas gift. Holy smokes.
So I'm curious as to what went through your head as you went now feverishly riding, because I'm sure you have a lot of things rattling around in that head.
So there are some things rattling around.
And his Christmas gift.
Ho, ho, ho. This is not original to me, but you made me think about what I've heard another pastor say, that Jesus makes you better at life and makes your life better. And I feel like that's what you've experienced, is that Jesus makes you better at life. He makes your life better because you've seen your friends who would say they were journeying with Jesus and then they weren't. And you've probably, to your credit, done a good job of observing. And it sounds like almost sitting one group beside this group and going, okay, this group over here, their life isn't exactly great. They may be indulging in some fun that's temporary, but when it comes down to it, their life isn't better. So I thought about that one. The other thing is I thought about how relational church has been for you. And it goes back to what I keep saying. Church is meant to be a people, a body, and a body is working together. And so when you have the body of Christ and all these different people, they're working in tandem with one another. And so it's extremely relational. And for you, you've seen your value, you've been known, and you've seen that you're needed. And that's something that not everybody experiences. What were you going to say?
I wasn't going to say anything. I was just nodding and agreeing with you.
I think that's one of the big separators for you, is the relational piece, that you've experienced that. Because I think a lot of people, again, they haven't seen this modeled. And your mom's done a great job of modeling it. Like, she didn't have to be so invested in the church, being married to me, who is a professional Christian, basically paid to be a pastor. But she chose for so many years to be a volunteer, and you've known, whether you've known it overtly or indirectly, that she hasn't had to do that. There have been plenty other professional Christians or pastors that you've been around whose spouses did not engage like that. So it hasn't just been something you do, it's something you are. And I think that to me is one of the biggest, hearing you talk and then me thinking about what you're saying is one of the biggest differentiators between you and maybe some of the other people. It doesn't make you better than them. It just means that you've had an experience that God's blessed you with, that you have capitalized upon in a way that now is benefiting you, and not just you, but so many other people. That's what I was thinking.
Okay. There you go.
Is that what you have on your paper over there?
Not that much, but the gist of it, yes.
So, parents. So we'll leave Matt out of this one as well. So, how or where have you guys seen influence with your kids in areas of faith? And what do you think's happened because of that? And I have a feeling I know what's coming, but go ahead. Anybody? Go ahead, Vanessa. You've been super quiet tonight.
I am very grateful that our best friends are the pastor and the most volunteer ever. And that we have had the opportunity to do so much of life with them and their family. And I think that Parker has only been positively influenced by that. And your journey into ministry and working with kids, I think, has also been a super positive influence on him. And I think him being able to see both of us grow in our faith, and we might take slightly different paths to get there, but we're both headed in the same direction, I think has been a positive influence on him. The fact that we study and the fact that we both, while we often fail, we do try to practice what we learn and experience through others. And I think the way we take and the way they take love, just love of people, and dish it out everywhere in every aspect of life, I think is the best influence ever. Because kind of to Matt was saying earlier about how, he had questions about the bigger picture, and I think that's perfectly normal. And I don't think that you have to, and I do accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, but I don't think you have to recognize that he lived a great life and he was a great person and he had a great positive influence on people. I think if you have questions, you still can't go wrong by trying to be more like Jesus. It's not going to make you a worse person. So, you know what I mean? So that's okay. I've said a lot of words now. You said I didn't say much. Now I've said a lot.
Well, we've heard other pastors say, and I think Brian has even said, you don't have to believe this, but you could put some of these things into practice. You can give some of these things a try. Even if you're not sure you believe everything about Jesus, you can still try some of this stuff and just see, if your life is better or if it's not. Because to your point, if you follow the example of Jesus, it's not going to make you a worse person.
Yeah, we had that happen in a small group on Zoom very recently. That someone who has struggled with belief actually got emotional, and it was great because we were able to reiterate that you don't have to believe to be a part of what we're doing. I've heard someone else say you don't have to believe to belong. Mm-hmm. And so that person responded by saying, yeah, you've made me feel that way. And for me in that moment, I'm like, that's a win. She feels like she's a part, and she's getting an opportunity to flex her faith muscles while being in relationship with us. And that's the church being relational, not being a checkbox. So.
And I heard Matt mention that word belonging more than once, to say I felt like I belonged. I felt like I had a place.
Yep.
I felt like I was needed. And all of those things contributed to wanting to stick around, wanting to figure it out. So to me, I think there have been small group leaders that have been very instrumental in the lives of our kids. I'm very thankful for multiple people, some more than others, if I'm being completely honest. But Matt in particular, because of what we were doing, I actually had the opportunity to do an interview for one of his small group leaders when he started volunteering back in the very beginning. And I remember getting off of the phone with this man. I'm like, he's going to be an awesome volunteer. And when he ended up being Matt's small group leader, I was not sad. I was like, this is awesome. And of course, he was more the dad. He was not the college student. He was the dad character in that small group. But you talk about someone who stood by these guys from 6th grade all the way through. I think he's still volunteering his time with college-age students at this point. And so for me, I'm like, I knew he was going to be awesome. But he to me is one of those all-star people who went through major life changes with these guys and experienced some major life change in his own life, but that didn't keep him from showing up, being there on a consistent basis. And I feel like as much as anything we did as parents, or as much as anything that happened in the church as a whole, his influence as it relates to Matt was as important as anything else. So just the showing up of small group leaders, I think is awesome.
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of influence, obviously, over the years with Parker. And same thing, small group leaders. You guys, other people, I think there's a lot there. I think really what I'm seeing now more than that, even more, are all 4 of your kids. In some way or another have influenced him dramatically. From May all the way up to Micah, in different ways. And I think I'm thankful because, kind of to Matt's point, and it kind of goes back to the word that I wrote and that you've talked about already, but connections, is that, people are spending time and investing time with Parker and not preaching to him, right? That's not what he needs at 13. He doesn't, he has me to do that.
Papa don't preach.
Right. But, including him and doing things with him and showing him, what it means to be Jesus, to what it means to have unconditional love or inclusivity with other people that don't have to show him that. Like, your kids don't have to show. It's not just because we're friends that they have. They don't have to show him that. Matt doesn't have to do that, but he chooses to. So to me, that's where I see the biggest influence on Parker is, what is he going to listen to the most right now, right? So he's not, even though he is listening to us, I know he is. He's not. He's that's going to come later. I understand. What I'm telling him now is he will, that will impact him later in life. I'm sure it will, just as it has with my parents when I got older, and that's going to happen. Or what you guys have both invested in him and what you've done with him, that's going to show up later in life. What these guys are doing with him now shows up immediate. Like, it's an immediate impact and influence. So much so that even with things that don't have nothing to do with faith, but hey, you should wear deodorant. Like, you stink. You know what I mean? Like, I could tell him that all day long. But one of your kids tells him, and like, oh, I need to use deodorant. Like, I don't want to stink. You know what I mean? But it's like that with everything. They're in small group together. Matt's, the small group leader. But they're having conversations that he's not going to have with me, and I get it. Like that's not the deal. But I see massive amounts of influence with that, and I think for parents listening to this, if you are not connected somewhere with people that matter, that with topics that matter, you got to figure that out, because your kids are going to listen to you to some degree, and I get it, they will. And we are our kids' biggest influence. There's no doubt about that. Every study says we are. However, like, we're not the only answer. And if we rely on ourselves to be the only answer, we're in trouble, and our kids are in trouble. They need other people speaking into their lives. They need other adults speaking into their lives, but they also need other peers that are good role models and influences speaking into their lives that we trust, that they are going to get things and listen immediately, that it's not going to have to be a 10-year process of them going, my dad was right, my mom was right, God was right. It's an immediate with I think, and that's where I see the biggest influence with him right now, especially in the church. So Brian, we need you to actually answer that.
I think it's important that you're okay with owning your flaws, because when someone doesn't own their flaws, you see them as fake. And I think there are plenty of pastors or church leaders that have tried to pretend like they don't have flaws, and everybody else sees them, and that reeks of inauthenticity. And so I think that's one of the biggest gifts we can give our kids, is to acknowledge them, own them, apologize for them, and I have to do that often. So you can ask Matt.
Your dad never apologizes, does he?
Nope. He's always right.
Well, he is your dad.
Somebody needs to give him access to like a song library real quick and let him
let him start playing music. I should.
music.
Yeah, you're right. I should have said, "Hey Matt, you can bring your phone and play any song you want to on the mic. Just play it. We don't have legal rights to use it, but I think it would be great if you did that." So same question, and Brian kind of already alluded to that. But how do you guys, and I want everybody kind of touch on this quick before we close this out, but how do we foster faith in our kids, or with the families and kids that we're around, right? Because I think there are people listening to this that don't have kids that go, well, this doesn't apply to me. But really it does, because, and we'll get to this in a second, but how do we have influence with everyone around us, especially families and kids? What do you guys think? Matt, what do you think?
I think it's pretty simple. It's just the way you act. I think you should just act like a Christian should act, and I think that gets lost a lot. Just with the overall perception of Christians as a whole, like what you said, known for what they're against, not what they're for. But I've always kind of like gone in with the mentality of when I'm at school, when I'm at work, like this person's different. This person isn't like everyone else. He's different. And if you talk to him, he just sounds different. And not in a bad way, not a bad different. It's a good different. It's I think just leading by example, just it's just the way you act. And I think just something I've always carried with me is just it doesn't cost you anything to be nice to anyone. You never know what someone's going through. One of my favorite quotes from a book is, you never can truly understand a man until you put on his shoes and walk a mile in them. And I've seen that in work, school. Like I wouldn't say I'm cool with everyone, but for the most part, people would say I don't have a problem with him. And I want it that way, because I want people to say, like, hey, why are you just nice to everyone? And then I would say, well, I'm glad you asked. Have you have a moment to talk about your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? And that's when I pull out my book. No.
What, your track? Let me tell you.
No, but then it's like, well, it's my faith. Like that's why I act the way I act. So.
Just let the mom pile in right on behind that. So
I think what he said, I think, is fantastic, and I feel like what I'm saying is kind of springboards off of that. And I think it's seeing people. He mentioned that before, that he felt seen, and that's one of the issues with the demographic that he's in right now, is not feeling seen. But I think when we talk about our kids and to our kids, I think it's very important that we see them. I think that when you get down on a knee to talk to a child, to acknowledge, hey, how was your week? And you speak to them not like you would speak to an adult necessarily, but you speak to them like they're a human being, I think is very important, because I think a lot of times we have a tendency to shush kids or push them to the side or use some kind of weird baby talk when we talk, and it's just this weird thing that happens when you're talking to somebody younger than you. And I think as adults, we can do it with middle and high school students and even college students. And you don't mean to, but it's becomes condescending. And I think even elementary and preschool age kids can pick up on the way that you're talking to me is weird. I'm a person. Like, they're starting to discover that they are human, and this person is not talking to me like I'm a person. And I think when you say, hey, how was your week? What's going on? And even if they're 7, you're asking them questions that you would ask another person. I think it's important because it helps them feel seen. And I think if we can do that with kids and middle schoolers when they're in their most awkward, weird stage, and high schoolers when they're trying to check out and be too cool for school, and college students who feel like they should have it all figured out, but they don't. I think if we can just see people and talk to them like they're human beings and not try to teach them a lesson, but just see them and talk to them, I think that goes a long way to those kids and students and young adults feeling like they're accepted, like they have a place where they belong, where they can say, hey, I'm not doing well, or hey, this is my question, or whatever it is that they want to say that maybe they don't feel like they have a place to say anywhere else. So maybe that's too long, but that was my thought.
Yeah, it's more caught than it is taught. It's got to be real in you. So that's my answer.
I'm going to say one more thing. Jesus always acknowledged children like they were people. And I think, to act like Jesus, to behave the way that a Christian would, is to acknowledge, hey, you're a person. You are welcome here.
Yeah. That's why we should know people's names.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good at names. I don't want to get on a soapbox, but it's pretty much saying I don't care to know you beyond you being somebody who's ambiguous. Mm-hmm. And I don't like it because it doesn't communicate value.
You're up.
Kind of piggybacking on what everybody else has said, I think we can have influence by recognizing the fact that our interaction with somebody, regardless of their age, might be that person's only opportunity to see Jesus in a day. And honesty, and like Brian said, we are all flawed, and it's having an influence on somebody's faith is not always having it all put together. Granted, there are certain things that small children don't need to know about what you may be struggling with, but they can know that you are struggling, that you've had to have a long conversation with God today, about something that's going on in your life, or that it's okay for them to need to do that, So And depending, I'm not going to go to Matt and say, I had to have a long conversation with God today. I mean, you can temper it to the age group that you're talking to, but honesty and being a genuine representation of yourself while trying to be a representation of Jesus, I think, is my answer. And I'm sticking to it.
Okay. For me, I think all that makes sense. I mean, it's hard to pick one thing. I think when you think about kind of where I'm at right now with kind of where my walk is, I want Parker or anybody that I have influence with to see that I can't do it on my own. If I want to foster his faith, if I want to help him in his faith, I need him to see me being dependent on God. I need him to see that I can't do it on my own. I need him to understand that that's okay for him not to be able to do that on his own. I think for so many of us, we grow up in this world that it's all on us and we have to make things happen, and that doesn't foster faith. That fosters self-reliance, right? And part of that's good. You have to be able to get things done when you need to get things done. But I want him to see that I don't have it all, to your point, I don't have it all figured out, that I can't get it done on my own, and that the only person that can help me is God. That's the only person that can help me get through some of the things that I'm going through. And I need him to see that. I need people around me to see that, especially those that are, maybe questioning, or those that don't have, a mature faith at this point, to go, okay, you're 47, you lived a lot of life, and you're still having to depend on God? Yeah, I am, because that's that's how it works, and that's how our faith should be, if we want to make it really and be and have a good relationship with God. I think that's the only way we can be. We can't go to God and not be dependent. I mean, it's just not how it works. So I want him to see that, and I think that's the biggest thing right now with me and him. And we've had a lot of conversations lately about, hey, this is how we need to function, and I screw up, and I am sorry, and this is how we need to handle things. So I don't know. So let's close out. I think we've had a lot of good things that have happened today. And again, the podcast has gone slightly longer than I thought it would. But again, I think we get rolling and all kinds of stuff happens. But kind of in the same vein that we just were in, final thoughts, maybe a practical example or example from Scripture, or something that are going to help parents listening to this help their kids during a transition or during the time they're going through. I know all of us have kids, or a lot of us have kids, and we're all in different stages, but they're probably all going through something. I've never experienced a kid that isn't going through something at some point, or many adults that aren't going through something, I guess would be a better way to put it. So in no particular order. So I originally had an order on the paper, but I don't want to do that. This is going to be an all skate, everybody answer, but who wants to start?
Okay. So I think the first thing I would say is don't do that alone. God didn't make us to be operating as an individual. He made us to be part of the body. And even if you don't believe, I think you can find a church that wants to partner with you, and so that you have those other voices. So you don't have to do it alone. The verse I shared at the very beginning was 1 Corinthians 12:27, where Paul writes, "Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it." Everybody has a part, that parent, that child, and when that part isn't active, it hurts the whole body. And we can think about the human body, and when certain things don't work right, it's not a good thing. I'll let you fill in the blank on whatever you want to fill in the blank with. The other thing is, I think of a scripture we have prominent in our home in Psalm 90:12, where Moses writes, "Teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And the reason I bring that scripture up is if we don't remember that our time is limited, we waste it. And so it's so important to realize that your time is limited. And when I look at Matt and he's 19, I still remember him as a 2-year-old. I still remember him being enamored with Thomas the Tank Engine, and it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. But it goes awfully fast. And so it's extremely valuable to make sure that you number the days so that you don't waste them. And that would be my biggest encouragement for parents.
I think that's really good, and thanks for making me cry. But I think making the most of your time, not wasting your time. But I really love what you said, including other people in the process. And I think that that's true for parents. I think parents should include other people in the process, whether it's small group leaders. I mean, I think every parent should have their kid involved in whatever life stage ministry they are a part of so that they can be connected to a small group leader. I think I can dogmatically say I think every parent should do that until they cannot force their kid to do it anymore. I think that they should do that. But I think for college students, for singles, for people who maybe are in one of those demographics that can sometimes feel a little bit left out, a little bit on the fringe, a little bit on the outside, to that group of people, I would say keep showing up, keep using your voice, keep letting people know, hey, I want to be part of this community of believers. I don't feel like I'm well represented here. Here are some of my questions. Here's what I would like to see. I want to be here. I want to belong. I just feel like, please don't give up. Please still be part of, find a place where you can feel comfortable enough to say, hey, hi, I'm here. And I think for people who are in leadership positions, we should listen. We should look around. We shouldn't just surround ourselves with people who look like us and think like us. I think it's important to, look down at the people who are not down at them, but take the step down for the children to say, hey, this is what they're going through. School's different for kids now than it was when I was 7. I need to pay attention, and I need to pay attention to these middle schoolers and these high school students and college students, and even to your point earlier, Brian, the adults who have already raised their kids or maybe are in the later stages of their lives and never had children for whatever reason. I think just not doing it alone and looking to see those people there, I think is huge. I like what you said about not doing it alone. I think that's true for parents, and I think it's true for college students too.
Yeah, well, for me, going through middle school and high school, I had a verse that I always just kept with me, and it was 1 Timothy 4:12. It was, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for the believers in speech and conduct and love and faith and in purity. And I always tell my small groups, I've always told them, I'm like, if you need somewhere to start in the Bible, 1 and 2 Timothy is a great place. Because, one, they're in middle school and high school. And Timothy is one of the youngest people, the kind of examples in the Bible. And because a lot of kids, even me, see him as like, okay, Paul's just an old dude with a big gray beard. like they're all just old men. But then like you read about Timothy, you're like, he was young and he was doing all this in the church. He was this big. He was taking on a lot in the church all at one time. And I think reading about that goes back to even what we were saying at the beginning of, he's like me. They can relate, and seeing verses like that, like don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, really just stuck with me. Just that part right there stuck with me, because like even when I would like serve and like whether it be tech, small group, band, I wasn't gonna let anyone treat me different because I was young, and even if they did, I would just show them, not that I was better, but that I wasn't just some 6th grader, some 7th grader I would set an example for them, and then they, going back to what I said, was like, he's different. He's not like the other 6th graders, the other 7th graders, the other 8th graders, the other 9th graders, so on and so forth. So I would say that's kind of a verse that's kind of resonated with me, and I think for a lot of people, I think those 2 books just in themselves are very helpful.
I don't have any specific scripture, but one of the things that I thought about thinking about this in general, I don't know of any circumstance where Jesus ever said, "I told you so." But there are lots of circumstances where Jesus asked why the people around him didn't have faith. And I think that's important. Jesus lived a perfect life, and he knew it all, right? And the people that he was walking with in his time on earth didn't know. And I think while some of the scriptures where he asks, he comes across as being slightly angry, he very well may have been, but I think he still genuinely wanted to know. And I think that's an important question for us as parents, to be willing to ask people if they're struggling or if they're new to faith, why? And be okay to sit and listen to the answer. Mm-hmm. And then when somebody is struggling, like I said, I don't know of any example where Jesus said, "I told you so." He told Peter that Peter would deny him, and that he didn't come back and say, "I told you." Look what you did. So I think it's important to not take that mindset, even if we are right and we do know what's going to happen and we do predict what's going to happen, and we tell the person, if you go down this road, this is what's going to happen. And if they go down that road and it happens, it's still important for us to be there without an "I told you so" attitude on the other side of it.
I find it interesting that every time you talk, Demas goes crazy.
Sorry, my dog wants to go outside.
The dog says the podcast is over.
We're done. Yeah, I think for me, and it's everybody's touched on it tonight. I think it's the same thing. Is get connected, right? So, and I think what's important about that is humble yourself to get connected. And what I mean by that is, you could maybe think you know everything when it comes to your faith and your kids, but I can assure you probably don't. Whether you think you do or you don't, I think you need to take a step back and humble yourself. And I think you also need to humble yourself in this way. If you're scared, if you're not understanding how to get connected, if you're afraid of that world, and maybe you're not a believer, but there's something to this, and that there's a better life that you want for your kids, and you think this is a way to do it, I think, as scary as it is, reach out to someone. I think I can't imagine, and I'm sure there are situations, but I can't imagine reaching out to a local church or someone that who is a believer and said, "Hey, I don't necessarily know everything, but I know that my kids need direction," right? What does that look like? And I may be scared of what the answer is. And maybe I'm scared. You're scared because you think you're going to have to give things up. And your kids are going to have to get, like, we go through that whole thing. We all know how that works. But, man, just humble yourself to say, it's okay. And it's going to be better. And my kids are going to be better for this no matter what. I think you got to do that. And I think it all goes back to connections. I think all of us look back in our lives about where we are with our faith, and it's probably not some huge sermon as much as maybe it is. It's probably not. It's probably a connection that you had with someone in your life, or your parents had, or your friends had, or somebody had that drew you in or kept you connected somehow. And I think that's, to me, the biggest thing that I've taken out of this conversation tonight, especially with Matt, is, man, we just got to get them connected. and I think that's extremely important. For me, Deuteronomy 6:4-9, I mean, we talk about that all the time, but and I won't go through the whole piece, but to me, that's why I'm kind of in ministry, especially in kids right now, is just because that's kind of where I feel like I need to be. And if you don't know the verse, go back and look it up. I don't want to bore you tonight, or not bore you, but we need to wrap this up. So, but for me, that verses speak loudly to what our job is, and what my job is as a parent. So with that said, we want to thank each and every one of you for taking time tonight to engage with us on the F4 podcast. Please follow us on social media, like and share the podcast if you think it can be helpful and or entertaining to other people. Maybe you just want to laugh at us, and that's fine. We would love for your specific feedback so we can get better in providing content that would be helpful for you, because as helpful it is for us, we're doing this to possibly help someone else. So we can't do that if you don't give us our feedback. And I would just say thanks again for listening, and we look forward to you seeing us again or hearing us again very soon on the F4 podcast.